Comment ça s'ouvre pas du tout? Oh, très bien. So,
ladies and gentlemen, we shall continue our session. The next item on our agenda will be the Council and Commission statements on vaccines and therapeutics in the context of COVID-19. I'd like to inform members that for this debate there will be no catch-the-eye procedure and no blue cards will be accepted. That brings us on to the debate. We'll start the debate with Ms. Primchak, who's speaking on behalf of the Council. You have the floor, madam. No microphone for the speaker.
Could you give the mic to Madam Primchak?
Yes, now it is. Yes, thank you. Thank you. On the behalf of the Croatian Presidency of the Council, it is my honour to contribute to the Parliament's discussion today on the vaccines and the therapeutics in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic constitutes an unprecedented challenge for Europe and the world. It has brought huge human losses, suffering, as well as social and economic damages to millions of people. It has put our healthcare system under exceptional pressure. It has wide-ranging implications for all of us in every part of the European Union. As we gradually start lifting confinement measures, we will have to learn to live with the coronavirus under strict conditions and constant monitoring. Only the development, production and deployment of effective and safe vaccines and treatments will hopefully provide us with a lasting solution to this global health crisis. Vaccines and treatments will be crucial for Europe, but they will be even more critical for our most vulnerable partners with fragile health systems such as Africa. Our ultimate and common goal, therefore, is to accelerate the development, manufacture and delivery of vaccines and treatments for everyone, everywhere, at an affordable price in the shortest possible time. The EU and its member states have embarked on a worldwide race to find safe and effective vaccine and treatments to counter the spread of the coronavirus. Regarding activities at the EU level, already on the 10th of March, at their first meeting after COVID-19 pandemic reached Europe, EU leaders committed to supporting research as part of our common response to the outbreak. The European Parliament has also raised issues related to the development of vaccines and treatments in its resolution on EU coordinated action to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, adopted on 7th of April. On 7th April, the Croatian Presidency organised an informal video conference where ministers responsible for research and innovation showed their determination to coordinate their actions and welcomed 10 actions for immediate response to the crisis. On 7th of May, in an informal video conference organised by the Commission, many Member States supported the idea of preparing a COVID-19 vaccination immunisation plan. To accelerate coronavirus, the Commission has launched a dedicated COVID-19 data portal that enables researchers to upload, access and analyse research data. Currently, there are more than 19 vaccines in development around the globe, but only 8 are so far subject to clinical trials. 3 candidates for vaccines are receiving support from EU funding through the research programme Horizon 2020. Member States are also investing in several candidates. Moving to treatments, it is encouraging to note that there are so far more than 40 developers of potential treatments for COVID-19 have contacted the European Medicine Agency and the Member States for scientific advice. Most of the treatments proposed are medicines currently authorised for other diseases. Clinical trials are currently ongoing to determine their efficiency for the treatment of the COVID-19 patients. The EU has allocated resources via Horizon 2020 to Discovery, an EU-wide clinical trial to test treatments, enrolling more than 3,000 European patients. The EU has already committed over 500 million to different research and innovation initiatives that include approximately 48 million to 18 projects on vaccines and treatments via Horizon 2020 research programmes. 72 million in public funds for therapeutics and diagnostics via the Innovative Medicine Initiative, with additional 45 million of expected contribution from the industry. Additionally, the EU has redirected 150 million euros from SMEs and startups for innovative solutions to tackle the outbreak via the European Innovation Council Acceleration Programme. Up to 80 million euros to CureVac and European vaccine developer via a common Commissioner Abe initiative. In order to respond to the urgency, the European Medicine Agency will speed up its regulatory procedures so that marketing authorization of safe, effective and high-quality COVID-19 related medicine and vaccines can be guaranteed without unnecessary delay. Turning now to activities at the international level. On 24th of April, the WHO launched a global cooperation for the acceleration, development, production and equitable access to diagnostics, therapeutics and vaccines. In response to this call, on 4th of May, the European Union, several member states and other G20 countries co-hosted an international coronavirus global response pledging conference. The initiative has raised 7.4 billion, including 4 billion from the EU and its member states. This is a very promising and important first step. There are a number of key challenges. Once new therapies are identified, the challenge will be to scale up production and distribution to make them available to patients throughout the world at affordable price. As regards vaccines, a first challenge is the patient's safety, and to produce vaccine in extremely high quantities since demand is global. At the European level, already in December 2018, the Council adopted a recommendation on a strengthened cooperation against vaccine-preventable diseases, which has the double aim of reducing inequalities between member states and increasing security of vaccine supply. EU instruments such as joint procurement could be used in that spirit to help ensuring fair distribution and solidarity among all member states. In order to tackle other important issues, such as securing sufficient and autonomous production capacity in the European Union, fair licensing and fair intellectual property rights conditions, it is necessary to involve all concerned actors, including industry and the public sector. In this context, I find it very encouraging to see that several manufacturers have agreed to pool their resources. Public authorities, pharmaceutical companies, multilateral organisations must work together to reach the common goal of making vaccines and treatments available to as many as possible. President, honourable members, we will defeat the COVID-19 crisis, and we will do it so with a shared spirit of European and global solidarity and responsibility. Thank you very much.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much for those words. Now we come to the Commission. Commissioner Shinas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Secretary of State, honourable members. From the very first day of this crisis, for us in the European Commission, one consideration was evident. No country in the European Union or worldwide can battle this pandemic alone. We need to take bold steps, and we need to take them together. Containment measures have proved efficient so far and allow us to diminish the spread of the virus, but they will not eradicate it. For this, we need further action, and we need further action on 3 areas. First, early diagnosis. Second, targeted treatments for the ill. And third, a vaccine that will ensure immunization. We will also need all 3 to be widely accessible and affordable, because as long as the virus exists in the world, no one can be safe. This is why the European Union is taking the lead in organising a coronavirus global response pledging initiative, which took place on the 4th of May. And the aim was precisely to lead the world effort to develop diagnostics, vaccines and therapeutics against the virus as soon as possible, not only to make possible to get to these objectives, but also ensure that are accessible on a fair and equitable basis once they are discovered. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity on behalf of the Commission to discuss a bit in more detail these issues with you this afternoon. First, vaccines. On vaccines, there is no doubt that this is the best way to truly exit the pandemic and avoid the resurgence of the disease. However, developing a vaccine is a complicated process that depends on close coordination, financial support, and unity. Each of these considerations was evident during the pledging event of the 4th of May that the European Union led at global level. First, we managed to attain our overall objective with an ambitious level of funding raised. We mobilized 7.4 billion euros, $8 billion in pledges, of which 5 billion came from Team Europe. Second, and equally important aspect of this pledging conference was that we sent, as a European Union, a resounding message of unity and solidarity across the world. And we also proved that in today's turbulent times, the European Union remains a force of good for the planet. And this was only the beginning. The pledging marathon remains open until the 23rd of May. So I take this opportunity to encourage all of you to engage in helping to find new donors, public or private, and to join forces in this unique worldwide effort. Obviously, here comes the big question: where are we on the vaccines? As the Croatian presidency just indicated, the WHO has identified 8 vaccine candidates in clinical evaluation and 94 candidates in preclinical evaluation. 3 candidates are receiving support from the Commission through our Horizon 2020, and Member States are also investing in several candidates. We need to focus efforts on finding the most promising solutions. And that's why the Commission has proposed to set up an EU-wide network for clinical trials. Such a network will ensure a critical mass of data from patients, help to identify the most promising vaccine candidates or therapeutics, and to swiftly move them into the most appropriate clinical trials. Once developed, of course, a vaccine will need to pass a rigorous approval process. And we in the Commission will work very closely with the European Medicines Agency to ensure that this process moves as swiftly, as quickly as possible, without, however, compromising on safety and efficacy. Honourable members, producing the vaccine is only half of the battle ahead of us. We should also ensure fair, widespread and equitable access to the vaccine as early as possible, not only to all Europeans, but also to the rest of the world. And there are many tools that we could use to achieve this, from public-private partnerships to increase manufacturing capacity to advance purchase agreements to ensure production. And the Commission is currently in intensive discussions with both our Member States and vaccine producers to identify clearly how we can best support Member States in the purchase and deployment of vaccines. All options are on the table, and we do not exclude any of them. Last week, health ministers discussed the possibility of a uniform COVID-19 immunization strategy throughout the European Union. This would also help us to maximize access to the vaccine when it becomes available, and I look forward also to hearing your thoughts this afternoon on these approaches. Let me now turn to therapeutics. The Commission has reacted efficiently to support Member States in this regard. I don't want to beautify the situation. We all know that the early stage of the crisis was not the example of optimal coordination. Many measures were taken rapidly under pressure at national level without the necessary coordination. But once this first stage went through and our member states saw the added value of cooperation and the interdependence that binds them together as European Union, with the help of the Commission, we reacted efficiently to support them. And let me recall some of these actions. Since day one, we have coordinated closely with all important actors, the European Medicines Agency, the ECDC, the national agencies, industry, to avoid or tackle bottlenecks, to better anticipate future shortages and to assist in the adaptation of production. In parallel, we have issued concrete guidance on the rational supply of medicines, regulatory flexibility and clinical trials to avoid availability of treatments. And we have activated the rescEU stockpile of medical equipment, including therapeutics vaccines, and we have established the COVID clearinghouse mechanism that facilitates the matching of the needs for medical equipment with available supplies. Thankfully, the situation is now beginning to stabilize in the EU, but we must continue working also on the supply side. And with this in mind, we are supporting a dedicated industry cooperation project to increase supply of critical intensive care unit medicines. Parallel to that, the European Medicines Agency and the Commission have put in place mechanisms to support the rapid development authorisation of new COVID-19 medicines and vaccines. And as we speak, we are currently preparing a joint procurement for such ICU medicines. Honourable members, let me conclude by saying that we are discussing today, of course, about the short term, which is saving lives and winning the battle to the virus on the medical side, but I would like to finish with a few words about the medium and long term. The pandemic has revealed and amplified important issues with our supply chain for medicinal products. I'm very aware how dependent we are on important pharmaceutical products or ingredients. So we need to come together quickly and identify solutions to the three emerging weaknesses from the crisis. How to strengthen our coordination mechanisms and supply chains, how to boost our preparedness, and how to improve our society's overall strategic resilience. The Commission is preparing a new pharmaceutical strategy that will take account of the lessons learned during the pandemic and make the EU's pharmaceutical system future-proof and crisis-resistant. President von der Leyen yesterday had the occasion to give you a bit of more detail of our very intensive work on the recovery initiative, which is to be expected in the next few days. And I would say that part of building this resilience for cohesive and resistant European societies passed from a very rigorous health program that would bridge this asymmetry between what Europeans expect from Europe in the area of public health and what Europe has in terms of legal competence to face up to this challenge. Commissioner Kyriakides and I will look forward to working very closely with this House on this endeavour. But first, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on the challenges and solutions, and I'm very willing to take them on board and report back to you at my earliest convenience. Thank you all.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now we have the debate the round of members, started by the European People's Party. Mr. Liese to start. You have the floor. Thank you very much, President, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we all are longing for normality. It's not just the economy that's suffering from the lockdown. People are suffering personally as well. But we've still have the effects of COVID. We still need to be extremely cautious and careful to make sure we don't see a second wave. So we need to move to digital solutions. I'm a little upset that Mr. Reinders only enumerated the problems this morning. I think we need to go on the offensive here. And let's look to Italy, Spain, France and Belgium, those countries that have suffered most under the crisis. Strangely enough, hardly anybody is complaining about the lockdown in those countries. In my country, in Germany, you get the impression that there's any reason to complain, even though we've managed to get by a lot better. So I would call on my fellow citizens and say, stop complaining, show a little bit of solidarity for those who've been hit harder than you. The definitive solution will only be provided by a medicine or a vaccine. I've been in a lot of discussions with people concerned, stakeholders. I'm quite optimistic that we'll be able to get medicines or vaccines quicker than under normal circumstances. The conference that the European Commission organised last Monday showed a very clear signal of cooperation and dialogue. But unfortunately, we also need a plan B, because the US was not participating in that conference at governmental level, and we still want to press for dialogue, but we need to be prepared, for example, to be coordinated in Europe to provide forced licenses or to use other instruments. If Donald Trump is going to start threatening with tolls on cars coming from Europe, our President of the Commission came out and threatened with countermeasures. And I think these measures these days also require just as strong action. So thank you to Ms. van der Leyen. Thank you very much. And the next speaker in this debate is Mr. Vulcan for the Socialists and Democrats.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, Commissioner, when the EPP talks about forcing licenses, then really we do have a big problem. Peter is right about a lot of things. There is very intensive work being done around the world in order to find a vaccine to tackle this pandemic. Commissioner Šefčovič spoke about solidarity this morning. He said that the well-being of a country should not be about living with this virus. We have seen that the CEO of a French medical company talked about developing a vaccine and it going first to the Americans. So we have to think about money that we as Europeans are putting into research. This should not just be a gift to a company. That is not about solidarity. It's capitalism, and we can't do that with people's lives. So what we need is fair and equal access in the EU and around the world to a vaccine, and I am pleased that my group has put together a plan for a European healthcare union so that we as European I think we realise that we have too much of a dependency in terms of our member states, and the next crisis will come in terms of healthcare, so we need to do a lot more, and I look forward to further cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vulcan. Now for Renew Europe, Ms. Chile-Lenoir.
Merci. Thank you very much. Madam President, health is a common good. It is a public good. It is a world good. It is a European good. We collectively defend this via our respectful behavior, as we are currently doing right now in this hemicycle. And we would like to also salute the efforts that have been made by the European Commission to collect funds for treatment, trials, and vaccines. The European Parliament voted with a broad majority in its resolution of April for a European health response mechanism, and we collectively have requested for there to be a strengthening of our health authorities, better cooperation, as well as the restoring of our European sovereignty. We cannot leave third countries to make us dependent on their research. Let us not allow the big tech giants, Sanofi or other countries, up the ante and confiscate the chances of finding a treatment. Let us work together to make sure that we negotiate the prices of any treatment. I agree with you, Commissioner. We must make sure that what we are doing is coordinated on a European level such that we are not competing against others. Let us make sure that we are using the EDCD to be at the heart of a European hub of laboratories with public-private cooperation. We will be able to do just that if we are united, determined Europeans who act in solidarity, and if we are able to do that within the context of the MFF, where there would be a specific program for health. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Trillet.
Thank you very much, Ms. Trillet-Lenoir. Now for the ID group, Ms. Sardone.
Microphone for the speaker.
Just a second. You don't have a mic. Could you please open the mic for...
Okay. Grazie.
Thank you, President. The health emergency and the coronavirus crisis, Europe has made many mistakes. There's been a lack of solidarity amongst the member states. You will all remember that there were not enough masks, not enough ventilators for those countries that were the hardest hit, for example, Italy. And then each individual country acted differently when it came to the swabs and the way of counting how many had died, as well as when it came to therapeutics and vaccines. That is unfortunate. But now I'd like to talk to you about convalescent plasma, which is a treatment that has been in place for some 100 years, and it is currently being tried out in Mantua and Pavia in Italy, and it is showing great results. In the most serious patients in the ICU, mortality goes from 15 to 5%, and in less serious cases, but mortality is even reduced to 0%. Now, if you think in the United States, there are some 116 universities that are experimenting this. Should we talk about the costs? Antiviral drugs can cost some 4, 5, 6 times more than a single bag of plasma. The Italian government and all of us throughout in Europe do not seem to be too interested in using this convalescent plasma. Why? Because of big multinational drug companies. There hasn't been enough investment in the sector. There haven't been enough things to make sure that we are garnering the funds necessary. And we are looking at other things, and I think that is a mistake, and I'm moving to my conclusion. We think that whilst we wait for a vaccine, Europe could invest in this, where we could have plasma banks throughout the European countries to be able to use this treatment. Thank you.
Sardone.
Thank you, Ms. Sardone. Now, Mr. Sutter.
Thank you, Chair. I first want to congratulate the Commission with the successful pledging conference of last week. A lot of public money indeed has been pledged now to secure funding for the development of vaccines, diagnostics and therapeutics. This money, however, of course, should not come as a blank cheque to the pharmaceutical industry. Policymakers should take the necessary measures to make sure that vaccines and therapeutics will be accessible for all. First, I believe that the EU should support the WHO in setting up a transparent and inclusive governance structure that will decide on the development, production and equitable distribution of future vaccines and therapeutics globally. All relevant stakeholders, including civil society and the Global South, should be represented in this governance structure. Second, the health of our citizens should not only depend on the goodwill, as we understood it, of the pharmaceutical sector. We cannot rely on voluntary measures only. If needed, EU member states should be able to make use of compulsory licensing. While we Greens have always been supporting this, I was happy to hear that also colleagues of other political groups like Mr. Liese just now are aboard for this idea. But to facilitate the use of compulsory licensing, it's also crucial that the EU urgently makes its legislation on data and market exclusivity more flexible. I invite us all to collaborate on this. Colleagues, let us use this health crisis to fundamentally improve our pharmaceutical system in safeguarding public health over profit maximization. If not now, then when? Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Kollegin de Sutter.
Thank you very much, Mrs. de Sutter. Next, we have Mrs. Kupczynska for the ECR Group.
Dziękuję, pani przewodnicząca.
Thank you very much, President. I fully support the event organized by the Commission, the event devoted to gathering and gaining support. We managed to acquire 7 billion euros in terms of donations. When new vaccines and therapies are ripe enough to be introduced to the market, European structural funds and other funds should be used in order to boost our production capacities. Of course, making sure that funds are equitably distributed between all member states. However, work on a vaccine is expensive enough and burdened with a high risk of failure. Developing good vaccines will take a lot of time, and we must be aware it will not be easy. Developing a vaccine quickly is very important, but such a vaccine should be safe to patients, because now we may not be aware of all the side effects. So, to wrap up, I want to ask the Commission, what do you want to do in order to ensure equal access to research results as regards possible vaccines, how to speed up clinical trials, and how to shape the issue of liability once vaccines are developed? Thank you.
Dankeschön. Es fährt in der
Thank you very much. Mr. Botenga for the GUI Group next.
I've got a question that I don't want you to answer. And that question is, how much are you willing to pay to save your life? And yet, unfortunately, that question is still very much used by many pharmaceutical companies to decide on the price of a treatment or a vaccine. That is what explains that a Belgian family had to pay 1.9 million euros for a life-saving treatment to Novartis. That also explains why the CEO of Sanofi dares to threaten to give the vaccine first to the United States. And that explains why today Belgian health authorities fear that the vaccine will not be available to all. So that is why it's so important for us to make sure that no pharmaceutical company gets an exclusive right on the coming treatment or vaccine. And granted, the European Union has by and large talked the talk. And that is important. We've spoken about a common public good that will not belong to anybody. However, when we talk the talk, you should also, or rather, walk the walk. Because otherwise, it's just hypocrisy. And that is why I was so surprised and indeed disappointed to read on the website of the Commission that you were not going to touch the intellectual property rights. Now, for me, it's very, very clear. We raised 7.4 billion. That 7.4 billion should not serve the private profits of pharmaceutical companies. Let me be clear. In a pandemic, patents have no place. We have a right to cure, and we have a right to a people's vaccine. Thank you very much.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Kollege. In der
Thank you very much. Mr. Pedicini next.
Thank you, President. I think it would be worthwhile to just remind everyone that vaccines are one solution and one that would be a part of a prevention policy. So this would be a drug that is used for those who are still healthy and not for those who are ill, so the majority of the population. So it is not enough for them to be efficient, but they have to be safe. There cannot be any collateral effects. And they must be manufactured and distributed fairly throughout the population for everyone. Develop means that we're going to have a lot of research, much research, long time for manufacturing and distribution. So this would not respond to the emergency that we currently face. We're currently undergoing a pandemic. There are thousands of people who are dying across Europe. There are some 7.4 billion dollars that were collected. The majority of that should be used for therapies that have shown to be effective. One would be the convalescent plasma, where there are hospitals in Mantua and Pavia have shown that they can cure some 100% of all of those who are admitted. With the obstacle that the pharmaceutical industry is throwing up, they don't find this a very interesting solution. But I think, President, that this is a scandal. We have a solution that is here at hand. We can cure those who are about to die, and we can save our economy with the use of this type of therapy. But we must make sure that the pharmaceutical companies do not stop that from happening because of their need for profit, and that they're not looking for the general interest.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mrs. Montserrat. Go ahead. Thank you very much, Chair, colleagues. In May, it is 40-year anniversary now, and thanks to the efforts we have made in terms of the vaccines, this disease has been eradicated. So now we have this new virus that has showed how precarious our situation is. We need a vaccine to bring a definitive end to this. We have the EU funding, which is there to finance COVID. It's a huge healthcare funding effort. It's a time to be ambitious, to be brave. We can't allow price wars between the public and the private, between different countries. We have to work together. We have to get rid of any barrier in terms of access. It has to be available to everybody all around the world. Whether when we delocalize production, we pay a very high price in healthcare too in Spain. We need to look at reindustrialization of healthcare in Europe. Europe is different to the US, to China, because we have amazing healthcare systems. This is a huge added value. So what we need to do is to really strengthen the EU system. We need to have more competences in terms of healthcare so that we can rapidly and effectively coordinate our healthcare system. Thank you very much.
Dankeschön. Und als nächster...
Thank you very much. Mr. Lopez next.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, President. The European Parliament is making an appeal to the member states and to the institutions of the European Union to act in a coordinated way, to coordinate, to look for a vaccine and an effective therapy to be able to tackle coronavirus. And we're looking for efforts from the member states and the institutions, but not only. We're also calling on the public and private sectors to work together. This Parliament is using the Commission's initiative as an example, the pledging conference, more than 7.4 billion euros that were collected in a joint fashion. That is not all the European Parliament is doing, however. The European Parliament is also sending a very strong message that we need to come up with a future inoculation that will be available, free, widespread, fair, and can be sent to all corners of Europe swiftly. This should be able to be possible because of the joint procurement method. Also, the European Parliament is calling on the European Commission in the future to make sure that there is a universal access to any future vaccine, and that globally. So no undermining of this approach, and not giving in to the competition for the vaccine or making the vaccine something that enhances inequality. We are fighting coronavirus, and therefore there is no room for competition. The world needs to make sure that it is working to tackle this in all corners of the world.
Wir fahren fort in der Aussprache.
Thank you. Next we have Mrs. Ries. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Well, there's a lot that's already been said. Some very crucial points have been raised. Our sovereignty, for example, when it comes to medicines in Europe. Our lack of preparation, lack of vision as well. Cutting to the quick, looking at treatment and vaccines, Discovery has been looking into 4 different branches, and on the 23rd of March there was a test carried out for many patients, and I think it's been reduced to 700 French patients and 1 Luxembourg patient. I'd like to know why we're moving away from that approach. That's a bit of a euphemism. Some people have mentioned European criteria being too rigorous and prices being too high, and that's why people are turning to Solidarity, which is a parallel trial that the WHO is talking about. So 157 are involved in this, and some moving to clinical trials according to the London School of Tropical Medicine, looking at what's been discovered, and I am winding up, between what's going on around the world. I've heard what you're saying, Commissioner, but there seems to be a difference between what's going on, and please reassure the Europeans on questions of accessibility. Thank you.
Dank, Frau Kollegin, und wir dürfen auch.
Thank you very much, and a very happy birthday to you as well.
Herr Kollege Juvin.
We have Mr. Juvin next. Thank you very much. We are approving widespread resources for pharmaceuticals and for medication, and at the same time we are concerned about the accelerated privatization of healthcare, of people's lives by certain large monopolies around the world. That is why we are drawing the Commission's attention to the following points. We need to have the necessary financing of independent research, which is universally accessible, rather than having it concentrated amongst large industrial pharmaceutical companies. We would also like to raise the issue of having a pricing model that has a focus on the relocalization of the pharmaceutical industry in Europe, and also to ensure the access of all to this common good, which is health. We would also like to warn the Commission on patenting these types of matters. We don't want to see research going in this direction. We don't want to see medicines that have been recognised and used for decades that could be beneficial being hoarded by pharmaceutical companies in this way. Thank you. Thank you. We will continue now with Mrs. Cavazzini.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The access to medicines saves lives. And if we want only those to have access to corona vaccines, those who can afford it here and around the world, do we want African states to be prevented from producing their own ventilators because of patent law? No, we can't want that at all. The EU has to ensure that everybody everywhere has access to life-saving technologies, medicines and future vaccines. And just to make sure this isn't empty, these aren't empty words, we need to take specific steps. The EU and its member states have to talk about compulsory licensing, open access to vaccines, and guarantee that. Many people have addressed that today. The EU has to exploit flexibility in trade law to make sure that anything produced under compulsory licenses can be marketed around the world. We want to hear a very clear statement from the Commission, Mr. Chinas.
Lassen Sie uns heute.
We're in this together, ladies and gentlemen. Let's send a very clear signal from plenary that the whole society and the whole world are the ones we're looking at, not just the ones who can afford it.
Dankeschön, und wir fahren fort.
Thank you. Let us continue now. We have Mr. Goikin next. Thank you very much. Let me just say, the Commission says we must be resistant to crisis, but that is impossible. This is not the first pandemic we've experienced, and it won't be the last pandemic either. Let me just say that I think it is very positive positive that there are over 120 projects working on vaccines around the world. But these processes, which normally could last a decade, have really been greatly accelerated. So we hope that maybe next year we can see vaccines globally available and we can directly help people. That is good. It is our duty as the European Parliament to put the framework in place to see who gets this vaccine when and at what cost. This is something that needs to be publicly available to all European citizens. Everybody must have access, and we must put in place the right framework conditions, where we start, how we do this, how fast it can be produced. We need to bring production back to Europe for medication and medicinal products in this way. We need to put this policy in place. We have 21 members across groups who have signed up to this manifesto, who want to do this to benefit European citizens. I am very pleased and very proud, and I hope the Commission will take note of that. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Als nächster
Thank you very much. Mr. Wallace next.
We're talking about addressing symptoms and not causes. The way we produce meat today, with thousands of genetically identical chickens and pigs stuck in massive factories, natural selection, an ecosystem service that provides real-time disease protection, is now effectively a thing of the past. If we do not address industrialised livestock production, we're sure to have bigger and more lethal epidemics than this one. And we cannot win the fight against COVID-19 and future infectious diseases unless we properly fund a public sector that values public health over profit. A health service should not be a business opportunity for Big Pharma. A health crisis. The chief executive of the French pharmaceutical giant Sanofi said yesterday that they can deliver a virus or a vaccine. The Americans are likely to get it first because they gave them more funding. This is a company that's subsidised by the French people. This is a company that distributed €4 billion to its shareholders during the pandemic. The COVID-19 Global Response Framework was announced on the 4th of May. What conditions will be attached to the fund? At the very least, public investment in a COVID-19 vaccine and the therapeutic development should come with hard conditionalities attached, including real, equitable public access, non-exclusive licensing and a cost-plus affordable pricing model. But even attaching these conditionalities would not deal with the root of the problem. We need to decommodify vaccines and therapeutics. We should nationalise pharmaceutical companies, and we should do it now.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Next we have Mr. Comín y Oliveras.
Gouvernement, entreprise.
Government, companies, everyone is in the race to find a vaccine for COVID-19. But that is not the real question. It's not just what can we do, but it's also what we can do to accelerate the development. But in addition to that, we also have to ask ourselves, is there anything that we failed to do in the past that would have meant that we could have shortened the time frame that we need to develop a vaccine? One example, research in SARS and MERS. Well, we stopped that in the first phase. Had phase 2 and 3 been completed, that would have actually done a part of the work that we need for COVID-19 today. And that would have meant that we would have gained precious time. And is there any research that we're currently doing that would be useful for future threats that are currently not being, that research that is currently not being pursued because there are not enough means available to be able to carry out that research? After this health crisis, we must do everything that we can to make sure that in the future we can tackle these crises better.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Metzola next.
Every decision taken by the EU should have solidarity at its core. We know that when we work together we are stronger and we can overcome any challenge. We have already worked together during this crisis and agreed upon the joint procurement of ventilators and other medicines and other necessities. This is a clear example of solidarity in practice. This was just the first step. We must do more. We need joint procurement when a vaccine for COVID-19 is available on the market. Let us show our political will for this now. We must seal our agreement within the EU to have joint procurement of vaccines now. When striving to control the spread of this virus and save lives, we cannot compete amongst ourselves. It is only when a vaccine is available for everyone in every member state that we can have a serious discussion about returning to normality in a competent manner. I am aware that the Maltese Minister for Health is also working towards joint procurement within Council. This is a position we are working towards as well. There should be agreement amongst everyone. Citizens expect EU institutions to provide direction, to offer leadership and peace of mind. Together we can provide all this through our decisions and our actions. Thank you.
Dankeschön, und wir fahren fort mit Herrn Kollegen.
Thank you very much. We continue with Mr. Ertug.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you very much.
We thanked the heroes, the doctors and nurses and the truck drivers and the parents. But colleagues, I just want to ask us all, to what extent, let me say it like this, to what extent do we protect the healthcare workers in the European Union? Is the level of the healthcare is the level of healthcare enough? This is an issue what I want to raise even particularly to the member states as well. We have to raise this issue, and I urge the European Commission to come up with a directive where we deal with the level of the healthcare workers as well. And I want to say, I prefer to bite the bullet of social distancing on the beach rather than seeing suffering the people from this crisis. Thank you very much.
Dankeschön, und wir fahren fort in der Aussprache.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gluck next.
Sehr geehrte
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the European Union has taken a leading role in developing vaccines and therapeutics. These endeavours have to be continued in the future. That's my first point. Secondly, the approval of medicines has to go more quickly. We don't want to compromise on patient safety, but we have to make sure that medicines are getting to the patients quicker. Thirdly, even with medicines that are being used at the moment, sometimes you only have 2 or 3 production lines around the world. It's unrealistic that we're going to be able to get all production in Europe, but we need a degree of diversification in production. And by the way, and here I'd just like to pick up on what some of the EPP colleagues have said, the idea of us having had our fundamental freedoms abused, that's not necessarily the case, because we have to fight for the good that Europe is doing every day. Those who are arguing to have to restrict the freedoms of people need to win that argument so that people understand how important it is. We have to play an important role that as the EU is at the moment. Each member state is too small to provide the best contribution to solving this crisis.
Wir fahren fort in der Aussprache mit Herrn Kollegen.
Thank you. And now we continue with Mr. Fest. Thank you very much, President. Commissioner Chinas has talked about the efficiency of the EU, the generosity, how well the EU has reacted. But I think that's just self-delusion and fake news. And a true parliament would not let that pass. We have to talk about the lack of medicinal preparation for the coronavirus crisis. There's been a complete lack of coordination of EU countries when it comes to tackling the coronavirus pandemic, and a true parliament would talk about the complete failures of Mr. Skinas, Mrs. von der Leyen and the whole of the Commission. A real parliament president would put this properly on the agenda and not talk about Poland, Hungary, or whatever vaccine it might be. But unfortunately, we don't really have a real parliament or real parliament president. Thank you.
Als nächstes schließt sich eine
Thank you very much, Mr. Holmgren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will do this in Swedish.
Obviously, it's incredibly important that we come up with a safe vaccine. We know that it's going to take time, probably a number of years, and also that it's going to cost a great deal to research and produce and disseminate. A lot of these costs are going to be covered by state financing, which is meant to go to finance research in large multinational companies. This money is being provided without any clear strings attached, no clear conditionality when it comes to immaterial rights, for example. The EU has promised to contribute 10 billion crowns. That's good, but first of all, we cannot basically give away 10 billion crowns without ensuring that there is fair access both to the patent and to the vaccine. If the world now is meant to finance the production of a vaccine, then the world should also have the free access to the patent for free licensing of this. Also, there's a precautionary principle. We shouldn't commit the same mistakes we did when we produced vaccines far too quickly for SARS.
Wir fahren fort in der Aussprache mit Herrn Kollegen Martuscello.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martuscello. Next.
Thank you, President. The entire world is waiting for a vaccine, but think about how long it took for AIDS, the time it took for us to be able to come up with a vaccine, and while we still don't have one, and we have to learn from our mistakes. We have to learn from what has happened. Europe found itself completely unprepared for this pandemic. As it was advancing in China, we realized in Europe that there weren't enough manufacturing sites for the masks because all of the masks were being produced by people who were hardly getting paid in China. And then in Europe they realized that there were no gloves because they were only produced in Taiwan or Malaysia, and that the hand sanitizer was not able to be produced in Europe either. So it was a number of different mistakes that meant that we were completely uncovered. The virus has been terrible. It is completely overhauled our lives. I'm a Christian, I'm Catholic, and for someone like me, it is a terrible experience to go through a period in which I cannot go into confession or see my priest. I have to do that via video conferencing. So this virus has to be fought through solidarity that Europe is going to have to find in quick order, and it has to be done in the north and the south, and not split between the two, but in a united way.
Und wir fahren fort mit Frau Kollegin Schaldemose.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Schaldemose. Next.
Tak for det. Også tak.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this debate and for the presentation by the Commission and about what measures have already been taken. I think we've already learned a lot in this corona crisis. It's so important to cooperate, learn about the disease, sit down together to see how we can cure and give a vaccine. I've learned a lot about that, which is good. But when we take the next step, we need to learn that we can't depend on the world outside the EU. We need to ensure that at a European level, we produce our own protective equipment. We produce the medicine here and produce the vaccine when that's ready at some point. We need to cooperate, finance it, and do it much better across the countries than we have done in the run-up to this crisis. My message is we can only do it if we cooperate and if we protect each other together. Thank you.
Schön, und damit kommen wir zur...
Thank you. And then we come back to the Commission and Council. For the Commission, Mr. Shinas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, honourable members, for this very useful discussion, very useful debate. I identified two families of issues from your statements. One, let's call it the quest for resilience, and the other one is what happens once we have the vaccine. How do we make sure that we avoid the problems that we saw in the early stage about distribution, access to a distribution of personal protective equipment. Let me start on the quest for resilience. There is no doubt whatsoever that Europe has to draw the lessons of these pandemics. I mean, it's evident. It's written on the wall. This is something that society will impose on all policy makings at all levels. As far as quest for resilience at the EU level is concerned, let me repeat what I said earlier. We have to bridge this asymmetry of expectations between what Europeans want from Europe in areas where Europe has nothing in terms of legal competence. This is a major issue. This contaminates public opinion, projects Europe on a negative light, and I really hope that this will be, together with my colleagues, one of our main lines of action in the months and years to come. Also on the quest for resilience, we have to make sure that the recovery initiative sheds lights and reinforces a self-standing health programme that is able to perform not only under regular, normal circumstances, but is also designed to face up to major sanitary crises and pandemics. This is also a major challenge in front of us. Finally, many of you also raised the issues of production, back to the EU, pricing, strategic autonomy, the place of Europe in the world, geopolitics. When it comes to pharmaceuticals and all these questions, I want to assure you that will be addressed in our pharmaceutical strategy communication, which we will be presenting to you together with Commissioner Kyriakides later this year. Let me now come and finish to the other cluster of issues of concern to you, which is what happens once we have the vaccine, how we make sure that access is fair, equitable, and this widespread distribution is available to all Europeans and the rest of the world. I think there are three options for us, three-point strategy that will allow us to act effectively in this respect. First, we need to ensure immediate access to vaccine supplies. And for this, we do have instruments to be deployed. Namely, we can create an EU stockpile of vaccines, serving as an immediate response through the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism. We can organize an EU joint procurement scheme, which will be secure purchase commitments in a stable framework. And the Commission could also procure directly on behalf of Member States vaccines making use of the emergency support instrument. Second, this was about immediate access. Second, about secure production. For this, we are already in close contact with industry, and we are exploring together with them concrete measures such as public-private partnerships to increase manufacturing capacity or to advance purchase agreements to ensure production. And thirdly, delivery. In the beginning, we might need some prioritization. This is precisely the objective of the immunization strategy that I was referring to in my opening statement. Such an immunization strategy could set priority strands for certain segments of the population, but we will also need to ensure access worldwide, because as soon as the virus exists, no one is safe. And this is, again, precisely the purpose of our global leadership in the framework of the pledging conference that should not end on the 23rd of May, when we have this critical mass of financing to speed up the production of vaccines, but we will have also a role after the 23rd of May to make sure that the rest of the world, and especially these parts of the world that have much more vulnerable health systems, like Africa or Latin America, will not be left out of these developments. Thank you all. Thank you for this exchange. Thank you, Ms. President.
Herzlichen Dank für
Thank you very much for those words, Commissioner. We'll now conclude this debate with the Council. Ms. Brinchak.
Thank you, Madam President. Honourable members, I wish to thank you for this important debate. We have one common goal around the world, and that is to defeat the virus. As the Commissioner said, no country is able to defeat the COVID-19 pandemic alone. There is only one way to defeat it, namely with a combination of prevention through vaccination and treatment of people who have fallen ill. Unfortunately, we still have to wait for treatments and the vaccines to be found. The European Union has mobilised important resources and it is fully involved in a coordinated global effort to develop, produce and deploy vaccines and treatments for all. A positive dynamic has developed with the launching of the coronavirus global response pledging effort. The European Union is fully committed to support member states' efforts within and outside the Union. We know that we cannot count on the cooperation of all EU institutions in this endeavour. In particular, we hope that we can coordinate with the European Parliament. Until an efficient, accessible, affordable vaccine is developed, it is important that we continue respecting the epidemiological measures to protect all our loved ones. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ganz herzlichen Dank, Frau Staatssekretärin.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. I'd like to thank everybody who took part in this debate. The debate is now closed. This item is finished, and have a nice day.